Hello, everybody. Hey, it is good to see you. Sorry we had a little glitch getting online. This evening, we're going to be doing a FRQ review. This says 2016. I'm going to look at some other ones as well. And we're going to focus on how to write a great FRQ for the APES 2020 exam. Hi. Weekly stream calendar. Science, environmental science, 7 p.m. tonight. Here we are. Biology, chemistry, check in for your AP live streams. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to talk about the exam changes. I'm going to go over a strategy checklist. We're going to do some review of what those task verbs mean, the FRQ verbs. Then we're going to look at a couple examples, specifically on posing a solution and designing investigation. And we're going to look at exemplars, non-exemplars, and then go over some takeaways. So just a reminder of who I am. If you haven't been here before, I'm Skylar Fishman. I've been teaching APES. This is my third year teaching APES. And before I was a teacher, I was an environmental scientist. One of the things that I did was I got paid like an hourly rate to write comments on environmental impact statements. And during that time, I really learned the importance of technical writing and science writing and how it's different. And so I think that's really informed why FRQs are important for me. So this exam in 2020, you probably have heard, I don't know if you guys heard, that it's all FRQs. Have you heard that it's weighted 60-40 between two of them? That's a little new and different. Yep, okay, that's why you're here, probably. So part of the reason why they've done that is to prevent cheating. Oh, great question. Let's put the, okay. I'll answer your questions about my background real quick before we dive in really deep. I worked for Environmental Defense Fund, which is a nonprofit. And then I worked for another nonprofit. In order to be able to do those comments, I also had to work for an environmental law firm and an environmental engineering firm. So I got some experience with those things on enough of a level that I could be registered an environmental engineer. And then my comments carried weight in court. So yeah, I hate writing, but I learned to love technical writing. It's important when you're talking about environmental things. All right, just a reminder to put in your questions in the ask a question. We're also going to work with the discussion forum tonight if you want to have that open on a separate page, because I'm going to ask you to do some draft writing. So why the FRQs? Why not multiple choice? Well, you could just say it's to prevent cheating, but the real reason is to test the depth of your knowledge. And as you guys probably know, APES is a really interrelated topic. It's like you can't talk about a topic in Unit 3 without talking about land use in Unit 5. You can't look at ecosystem services without also talking about climate change and the carbon cycle. So FRQs are a really good way to test that understanding of interconnectedness and depth. And it's that idea of environmental literacy and being able to be accurate and specific. I think that is a big barrier sometimes to people taking environmental problems seriously, is that we are not yet quite descriptive enough. But as APE students, you're going to become extremely accurate and specific. This slide has a reminder for you. So designing an investigation. You don't have to have anything open. We're going to, you can have the discussion page open. Great question. If you want to have slides open, you want to have these slides open for yourself, I recommend it. They are very wordy. Even though they tell me not to make them wordy, this is not word. That way you might be able to zoom in a little bit closer if you want to open them. I've also attached the scoring guidelines, which are in these slides, but I've attached them as separate PDF documents. So if you feel like, oh, I can't see that, you can open up the PDF documents. Great question. So here's my strategy checklist for writing a FRQ response in APES. And it makes the acronym ROAR, because then it's easy to remember and it's not super technical. You might have seen IDA or like SODAs or other fancy words that are that acronym to take you along the process the right way. I don't know if you've ever seen those before, maybe. I don't know. Let me know if that's like, yeah, I know what that is. Stop it. Sorry, guys. Locked in my house with my dog. So ROAR, no. Elmo, no. So ROAR stands for read, organize, answer, and reread. Read the question, and that's really critical in being able to do that in your time. Read the whole question. It's going to have multiple parts. They're going to relate to each other. They're going to help you. If you start answering part number one before you read the whole thing, trust me, you will give up some of your strategy of being effective in interconnecting things. You might start answering that and answer another question while you're doing that. So read the whole thing. Identify the topic. Make sure you, as you're reading, you kind of like on your page or on your document on the computer, because you can work with either, that you outline like AI, AII, BI. You make those points and note the number of points for each section, because that's going to help you when you reread know if you actually earned those points. And I think some of the tricks to success are figuring out what you're going to get those points for before you actually write the question. Organize, focus on the task verbs. Make a list of non-content vocabulary, such as if you're being asked to explain, you might have therefore or this leads to. Those connecting words are going to kind of help you make a sentence frame for yourself. And brainstorm vocab that you might need. So once I know a question is about a certain topic, I might even do a vocabulary vomit on a notepad, and so I can get back to that vocabulary when I need it. Because a lot of times AP is looking for very specific vocabulary. Then once you've written the answer, reread your answer as if you are not you. And I know it's hard because you are you, but read it as somebody else would read it and really see if you hit all those points and then move on. So make sure that you roar. I want to go over the task list, and I've also given you this task list straight from AP. And the reason why is because we're going to see a lot of describe, we're going to see a lot of explain, we're going to see a lot of identify, and we're going to see a lot of propose a solution. The other one that's not on here is design and investigation, but we're going to look at that a little bit later. And so I think one place where students get into trouble is with describe. It's not a whole paragraph, but it does need to go in depth. You know, like if you described me right now, you wouldn't just say there's a woman on the screen in a pink shirt. You would add details. So adding the key details is really important with describe. And explain, a process requiring steps in order. This leads to that because of this. Then that happens because of that. And I think students think they're explaining things because they understand it, but they're not getting that explicitness on paper to show the connections between cause and effect. If you do see a discuss, again, use those conjunctions and that cause and effect in detail and make sure you wrap it back around. And so I kind of like have this on the wall in my classroom as an anchor chart, and I have my students come back to it when they look at it. So here's an example of looking at task verbs, and we're just going to roar, and you can look, why don't you write in the discussion forum your roar. What vocab do you think you need? What are the points for? Task verbs, describe and explain. I've kind of told you the answers for that already. Why don't you try and draft an answer? Let's see it. what is a white nose syndrome, or WNS, is an emerging disease in bats. Humans are also subject to emerging diseases such as Ebola. A recent study suggests that the number of emerging infectious diseases affecting human populations has been steadily increasing in recent decades. Describe and explain a likely reason for the increase in emerging infectious diseases affecting human populations. You guys want to give it a try? Let's give it a try. Now, okay, I'm wondering if maybe we should try it here because I don't see, oh, I tried. Oh, okay, a likely reason is the melting of the glaciers. Many diseases from centuries ago were frozen in the glaciers and now are being released due to global warming. Okay. And so you were you were also going to that climate change or climate history topic. You identified a likely reason and you explained how that would lead to an increase in diseases. Okay, let's look at this exemplar. Oh, you didn't get to the explain yet. Yeah, I think you could have one more sentence for the explain, but let's look at some exemplars and then let's look at the scoring guideline. Oh, and Dakota's asking what the O and the A stand for. Hold on, I'll go back. I wouldn't let it slow you down if you can't remember it. O stands for organize. Organize meaning before you put things together in an answer, you're trying to get to your content and you're trying to get to your task verbs to kind of like get all your raw material. Oh, Dakota has a good one. Okay. Great. So getting at that content, you have identified a reason. As humans populate, you have basically identified a reason. So that describe and explain, we've gotten the describe good. We're going to go on to an exemplar. Okay. So in the chat, remember, this is 2 points. How many points does this get? 0, 1, or 2? One reason for the increase in emerging infectious diseases is carrying capacity and population density. Dakota, what do you think? Dakota's saying 1 point, Tanya's saying 0 points. The lurkers, I do not know what you think. All right, here's the thing. This is a 0. And the reason why it's a 0 is this person did the vocabulary vomit, right? But the vocabulary vomit isn't a description, right? Is carrying capacity a reason? Well, yeah, but what about carrying capacity? We have reached the carrying capacity. We haven't reached the carrying capacity. Diseases keep us from reaching the carrying capacity. We're past it. What about it? It doesn't say. So it's not in and of itself detailed enough to be describing or that. Yes, it's vague. It's the right terminology, but not using it in a way that links it to the increase in infectious diseases. Same thing with population. We're asking for describe. What about population density? Does population density, the greater it is, the more what, right? It needs to get into that, but you can't just say population density. You'd have to say increasing population density, or a high population density, or a low population density, whatever you want to describe. Does that make sense? Great. Really good, Tanya. I like what you wrote. So an exemplar means like the best possible thing. Like you hold somebody up as an example, right? Like my mom used to be like, why can't you be like your sister? She's the example of, she's a total exemplar of good manners. Non-exemplar is something we don't want to emulate, okay? Let's look at this one. Let's see what we think. One reason for the increase in emerging infectious diseases is the human population is greater than 7 billion, and this has also increased our population density. When people live closer together, this increases the chances diseases will spread due to increased contact. What do you guys think? Yeah, I got that, Tanya. 0, 1, or 2? Okay, I disagree with you guys. Did they describe the reason? Is this descriptive? The human population is greater than 7 billion, and this has also increased our population density. No? Okay, well, let's see what AP thinks. All right, so you're looking at the scoring guidelines for this, I believe it's 2000, I think it's 2016 question. So a sentence that includes these will get the full 2 points. 1 point will be this, having the right reason with the right explanation. So let's see how we did. Okay. So here, increase in population density or distribution. That's all you have to say. Increase likelihood of contacting spreading disease from others. So while we're always pushing details, you don't need a lot of details, you need the right details. And so if we go back to this exemplar, now what do you think? One reason for the increase in emerging infectious diseases is the human population is greater than 7 billion, and this also has increased our population density. I identify that as I'm talking about the human population. I say what's happening to population density, and then I explain when people live closer, the chances of disease will spread due to increased contact. So this is actually one of my students, and they hit this right on the head, and they got 2 points, okay? I think it's a common thing that when you think you need so many details to take up a lot of time agonizing over that. However, because your teachers are pushing you details, and yes, we want to go in depth with those details, but we don't want to spend a lot of time with tons of details. We want the right details, and we want to connect them. Remember, specific but accurate. Depth, but not, we don't need breadth. We need the depth. Right, exactly, Tanya. Don't beat around the bush. All right, so analyzing environmental problems and posing a solution. There are levels of this skill that we were supposed to teach you. Have you ever read about or been involved in solving an environmental problem? I think if your course and your teacher did the right thing by you, they were pointing you in those directions where we're not just looking at these problems. We want to know that you have some creativity and some background in how to solve them. That is part of the literacy that we need. Anybody? Have you solved yourself an environmental problem or been involved in it? That's real. I think like it's, yes, I think bringing a project out of trash absolutely counts. Waste reduction is huge. Educating others is huge. Education will be part of this. Yeah. But this could go all the way to, we're talking about like the Clean Air Act or marching for climate change or deciding you're going to help people get loans from the city to put insulation in their house so they use less energy. All kinds of things. It's broad. But in order to solve the problems, you need to be able to describe them. And this part is going to be 40% of the test. You'll have 15 minutes to read and respond, and then you will upload. Yes, planting trees is a huge solution, right? There are calculations that have shown that we could turn the tipping point of climate change around if we planted like 1 million trees, which actually we could do. There's 7 billion people on Earth. Yes, all of these are leading towards a solution. Yep. And they're increasing in depth. So you should expect to have to not just describe the problems, but to be able to weigh the advantages and the disadvantages of solutions. For example, wind power is extremely efficient, but if there's no wind, the disadvantage is you have to have a backup plan like that. All right. Here's an example. I rewrote an old question. Populations of large terrestrial animals, such as African elephants and snow leopards, are in decline around the world. Many of these large animals are now on the verge of extinction. So here I am changing this question a little bit to be more in the 2020 style that you're going to see. African elephants are endangered in part because of the poaching economy has thrived off exporting ivory to many countries. Identify and discuss 2 potential solutions to the problem of protecting endangered elephants from poaching. And they tell you it's 2 points. If they don't tell you it's 2 points, you could look at this and say, okay, I have to identify and discuss 2 potential solutions. That's probably either 4 points, 1 for each identify, 1 for each discuss, but probably not. It's probably going to be 1 point for identifying and discussing each potential solution. So I read it. I asked myself how many points. I know what the task verb is. It's describe. Oh, no, it was describe. I changed it to identify and discuss. Identify is like it could even be a 1 word. Identify is like, put the dart right in the middle of the dartboard. Tell me that thing as specifically as you can. Renewable energy. No. What kind of renewable energy? Wind energy. What kind of wind energy? Turbine. A turbine farm that's run by the local municipal power company. Just identify it, move on. Discuss means you're going to give some details in that and talk about how it's going to work. Then I organize. What vocab do I need? So I'm like, oh God, African elephants, keystone species. Okay, poaching, population declining. That could be unit 3 too. Biodiversity, case selected species, reproductive rate. Okay, we didn't get to unit 9, so you probably won't be asked this, but in unit 9, you would have looked at some conservation biology, some CITES, which is that international treaty on endangered species, the Red List, Endangered Species Act, kind of coming to your mind, what's going on. And then answer. So, oh, I'm going to go back. I don't want you to look at that. Why don't you go ahead and try and answer? I'm wondering if you guys can see it in the discussion, because I can probably read it a little bit better. Or if you want to type it, that way I can actually like look at your answers and comment on your answers. The discussion is here on the FRQ page. Shh. Guys, stop. Apologize for the dogs. So let's give it a try. Yes. Can you guys see that this discussion? No, because it's the circle of death. Ah, there it is. Okay. Yep. Yeah, just start a new response. So just a reminder, we're identifying and discussing 2 potential solutions to the problem of protecting endangered elephants from poaching. All right, guys. Technical. Is it technical, or am I just not seeing them for your drafts? All right. I want to make sure we get to look at everything in here. Oh, you're still replying. What do you call that? Called a land, a land that is set aside for animals and plant. Oh, no. Oh, great question. Preserve. A wildlife preserve. Right. And so you're doing the O part of this response. You're organizing. That's the O part. Is being able to do reserve. They are often called both. You would probably be given credit for both. Both speak to setting aside land that is specifically for animals whose populations are small to be able to stabilize their populations, a wildlife preserve. Great, so that's part of the O part there, is getting that vocabulary together. I don't mean to rush you guys. I do want to see what you write. Because I think that's comparing and contrasting it is how we grow. And I think if you had been stuck, you could have said, put aside land for animals and plants that is protected if you had said that, that would have been fine. So even if you can't find the direct vocabulary that's going to nail it on the head, then try and really be specific about what you're going to say. All right, let's look. A potential solution could be Congress could create legislation where the United States would aid African countries who are already trying to prevent poachers, in turn to help them protect the elephants and fight back against the poachers. Another potential solution could be establishing a wildlife reserve where elephants live and help protect that land. That is an excellent, excellent response. I could not find anything really to change. That would be 2 points. One solution would be a set a limit on the number of animals in each species one can poach. Oh, okay. So here is where understanding content vocabulary is really critical and having some cards. So poaching is illegal. So the limit is already maxed out. That's the only problem I see with that, okay? So let's look at the scoring guidelines, shall we? So 2 points, 1 point for each correct discussion of a conservation strategy that was identified. So there you go, didn't take much. More laws limiting hunting would result in less poaching, greater animal survival. That part is important, is bringing it back in. There's no half points. So I think in your response, Dakota, I think you also had to bring it back around. Does that make sense? All right. So tusks dying, elephants, horn removal, or rhinos, devaluing animal parts would mean less poaching. Okay. And you can see the one leads to the other. It's okay. It is difficult. And I think because this is, I don't quite, and let's put the questions in the question box, but I'm going to get back to that in a second. One piece of advice I have for you is for this particular type of question, you have 15 minutes and that is it. And so to make things easier for yourself, I would have some note cards organized by those units of kind of essential content. Not that you're going to have time to like go research this, but if you have those key vocabulary words in you and in front of you in a concise way, you'll have the opportunity to go find that word. Yes, elephants are case-selected species. That's why it's really important to protect them because they don't have a lot of offspring and they don't have offspring very often. And so when you had organized, you could have pulled out the Unit 1, Unit 2 cards. That would help you. And then understanding that you need to provide that solution and talk about how it gets back. All right, so 60% of the exam is about designing an investigation. And that's good news. That's great, Tanya. I think that's a good idea. I think a full sheet of paper, whatever works for you. The reason why I tell my students cards is because you want to be able to get to that information quickly. You don't want to have to search a page for something. You have already organized and you know what you're looking for. So you don't want to have to review in 15 minutes a whole page and to pull it out. But if you make it color-coded, if you make it easy to access, that's a great idea. Yeah, boxes with headers. All right. So we have 20 minutes to talk about a huge part of the exam. I'm excited that it's designing an investigation because I think we'll know we succeeded as APES teachers if you have a scientific eye on how we should be learning about the environment, testing hypotheses and finding, giving evidence to analyze whether a solution is right or not by making these investigations. What experiments have you guys done before we all went home? Yeah, have you done any actual experiments? Bubble lab, I love that one. Yeah, I think that bubble lab, it's a pretty good lab, because if you are going to count survivorship in aquatic species, you have to do a process like that of collecting that data. If you've done self-study in this class, I would highly recommend looking for virtual labs, and I will put some virtual labs in the discussion because I think it's important to do experiments, and there's some really good virtual labs out there because when you do an experiment, you kind of understand. Okay. Yeah, the more you do, the better off you are. I think it'd be fun to do a virtual experiment on Fiveable, but let's talk about some experiments. All right, so this slide is kind of critical because here's your list, and they may or may not prompt you with these things that you need as part of of designing an investigation. I would definitely put it down on my sheet, as you need to talk about hypothesis. You need to identify your independent and dependent variables, your control variables, your procedure, and how you will do your data analysis. You've got to be, and now you've got to be specific, as if you're telling somebody who doesn't have any idea what you have in your mind, what you will have in mind. So here's an example. This one is from 2003. I've put the scoring guidelines there for you. And I think it's worth our while to try it. Design a controlled experiment to determine whether worms, in fact, do change the forest floor. Now remember, this is part D. I'm only giving you a little part of this. This is the text that it came from. And the basic gist here, because I didn't give you the other questions, was Dr. Tate has found the Asian worms, unlike their indigenous cousins, consume the entire layer of leaf litter in a single season. He said, this sets the stage for takeovers by invasive exotics such as Japanese silk grass. So whether worms, in fact, do change the forest ecosystem. Read the question. O, what are the parts you need for a controlled experiment? I also might be starting to think worms, forest floor, forest ecosystem, leaf litter, decomposers, invasive species, how do invasive species outcompete others, soil, nitrogen cycle. I'm doing like my organizes, like my brainstorm of what's really going on here. And even though you're not describing, explaining, you did that in the earlier parts. So you would have had some of that there, but you want to start thinking. I put this picture there for you to kind of jog your thinking here, as we're actually talking about this ecosystem here that needs that huge amount of detritus, and now there's a worm gobbling it all up. You're going to have to clearly describe all these parts in paragraph format, longer than a few sentences, actually. That is why they are giving you, I think they're giving you 20 minutes to write and 5 minutes to upload. Reread it as if you had to do the experiment yourself, and could you? That's right, 25 minutes. All right, I'm going to look at these questions. You are going to try it. And remember these parts. What's your hypothesis that you're testing? How would you test it? In fact, if you guys want to just get to hypothesis and variables and control, I think we'll have a lot to talk about. And one of the questions that was asked was, should you mention the limitations of your experiment? Absolutely, but here they're asking you to design it, not to evaluate it. And so you may not need to get there. I think rather is to design it specifically to address all the limitations that you could. If they said evaluate an experiment, then yes. Here you're identifying the environmental factor you will measure. That is the independent variable, and including your specific hypothesis. Yeah, Dakota, I think that's a good question. Why don't we look at some exemplars? Dakota, one thing, and I would say to everyone, is look at data nuggets. These are real experiments that environmental scientists have done, and you can kind of see the format of those experiments. I would definitely go to their website. I'm going to post it. And I'll also put some virtual labs in our talk, because I think if you haven't done experiments, it is tricky. And the virtual labs, I think, are really good too. So I'll put those in the discussion forum. Let's look at this exemplar. Is this an exemplar or non-exemplar? I'm going to put a point up. So is it good or bad, really? Okay. All right, there's my poll. Does that show up for you guys? Okay, let's take a poll. Maybe some of the lurking people will also have an opinion. We got 2 points. Tanya, way to go for it. 4 votes. Okay, that's 4 out of our 5 people. Somebody hasn't voted yet. Let's look at it. Remember, we're designing a controlled experiment. They want us to identify the environmental factor and put it in a hypothesis. Worms are changing the forest floor because they are consuming leaf litter faster than the native species, causing the soil moisture to drop. So some basics of hypothesis, I think, will be really good for us to cover in our FRQ sessions going forward. But this is testable. It identifies a variable that we can measure. We can measure the soil moisture drop is the dependent variable. Worms are an independent variable. We can test this. So it's a good hypothesis. And I think I could spend a whole entire live stream on what a good hypothesis is. In order to do this, I should have edited this. In order to do this, I would set up several plots in the forest. some with invasive worms, and some with a mix of both, and some with only native worms. The plot with the native species only would act as the control, okay? Yes, and people are asking me, the hypothesis formula is independent variable, then dependent variable. So I did teach my students that way. They are not going to score it if it's not in this format, but you could try it as well. You could rewrite this in the format of, if there are more invasive worms, then the soil moisture will drop because they are consuming all the leaf litter, which allows the soil to dry up. So that if, then, because, I think is really an important kind of way to start learning how to write a hypothesis. If, and it's the independent variable, and when you don't change, you have to describe how it changes. If it goes up, if it goes down, then because. And that's the reason. They're not letting me reply to the screen. I don't know. Maybe I need to. It'd be great if we would put that in the discussion. Okay. Design a controlled experiment to determine whether the worms, in fact, do change the forest floor ecosystem. Identify the environmental factor you will measure, including the specific hypothesis you will test and the data you will collect. Here's the scoring guidelines. Now, again, this is from a 2003 experiment. So we don't know if these guidelines are exactly going to look like this, but we're pretty sure because they've been doing it for years that way. Is you got 1 point for a hypothesis. Worms are changing the forest floor because they are consuming leaf litter faster than native species, causing the soil moisture to drop. Is it testable? Does it include the environmental factor measured? I outline a reasonable procedure for the experiment control group. We would call this the IV. And I want to move on to another example. Because that is an exemplar response. All right. Design, can you figure out what's missing? Okay, I'm going to go on to the last. All right. On a field trip of 2 local ponds, this is a 1999 released item that you can look up. On a field trip to 2 local ponds, a group of students observed a difference between the 2 ponds in the diversity of worms and insect larvae living in the mud and debris. Okay, I'm going to look at it, Tanya, because I think getting feedback is really the key to improving. That's good. It's good that it's long. No, okay, well, we all start somewhere. On a field trip to 2 local ponds, a group of students observed a difference between the 2 ponds in diversity of worms and insect larvae living in the mud and debris near the edges of the ponds. Numerous factors, both biotic and abiotic, influence the distribution of aquatic organisms. Distribution meaning where they are. Larvae of a certain insect are found in pond A, but not pond B. Design a controlled experiment that would help explain the observed distribution. So if we did our ROAR, if we read the question, maybe we see we've got to design a controlled experiment. We know it's going to be all those things that we need: a hypothesis, variables, control, procedure, data collection. We organize. I would look through this and immediately I see oh my God, biodiversity, insect larvae, aquatic ecosystems. What are some biotic and abiotic factors that affect them? And I organize that. I get my notes out. I start looking at those variables that are going to influence whether aquatic organisms are there. And in this organized time, I am seeing this principle of tolerance. I'm seeing a range of tolerance. I remember, oh yes, some organisms are really only adapted to certain pH or certain temperatures or certain amounts of nitrogen. And so that's going to determine whether one lives in pond A or pond B. How am I going to test? Well, I'm going to do a test about range of tolerance. So then I'm going to answer each part, and then I will reread and make sure somebody would be able to do that experiment based on what I've given. So exemplar or non-exemplar? Let's take a poll. Okay. Okay, let's do that range of tolerance poll. What do you guys think about this answer? Sorry. Oh, Tanya, don't feel that way. I think one thing that's really exciting about the field of environmental science is a lot of people do field work. And I did a lot of field work with my students. We were out in the creek collecting samples. And like, think about Forest Service workers. Think about people who work in wildlife. They're out there. They're doing experiments all the time. They're putting radio collars on animals. They are growing plots. They are measuring things in actual forest. That's called in situ. Now, laboratory tests are fine for things too. We could recreate that entire range of tolerance in the laboratory. We could gather the leaf litter and gather the soil and recreate it. Same thing with these local ponds. We could take this insect larva into the lab and have more limitations. And sometimes limitations are good because you're controlling more variables. And so the only variable you'll change if I took this into the lab . All right, there's my poll, but I closed it. Student answer, I would create a setup in the laboratory with water and the same type of debris at the edge of the pond. I would make the tank in the lab and make one side of the tank hotter than the other and see where they like to hang out. Do I have a hypothesis? Do I have a variable? This is the beginning of a good idea, but it doesn't have a hypothesis. So does this student receive full points? What do you guys think? Let's do it in the chat because we're running out of time and I don't want to take up your time. I would put your hypothesis towards the beginning because the person reading your experiment won't know what you're trying to test until you say it. Oh, it's your hypothesis here. You put it there in the chat. Yeah. All right. So some takeaways. Know your content, make your note cards or make your reference material so it's easy and fast to get to it. Know your task verbs so you understand if it's identify, you know what you need for an experiment. You know a solution needs to be like who's going to do it? Is it actually doable? And how is it going to work? How is it going to solve the problem? And you connect it back. Review scoring guidelines for released items. You can Google these, and I've attached the scoring guidelines for the questions we were working on tonight. And so because feedback and trial and error and practice is the best way you're going to get better at this. And I would say, especially for the experimental stuff, go to Data Nuggets and go to the virtual labs that I've put up in the comment section. And thank you. This is my second live stream. You guys are awesome. So any feedback is really appreciated. And if you have, I'm going to answer these questions. Oh, can you say real animals have to be used? You can say you're going to do it in situ, or if you do it in the lab, then you have to be clear that you're using animals that are specifically bred for laboratory use. It's not ethical to take animals out of their environment to test them in a laboratory, but let's say I want to test something about Daphnia, which are water fleas. I could say I'm going to get water fleas and test them in the lab of the same species. Okay. All right. I'm going to end the broadcast. I will definitely look at what you guys wrote in the discussion forum. And like I said, I'm going to post those virtual lab links for you there. Thank you so much. And again, I really appreciate you guys, and any feedback you have is always helpful, and good luck to you. Good luck to your preparations, and good job preparing yourself. Have a nice night. Thanks, Tanya. Yep, I hope to see you guys soon too.